Dairy Sustainability Framework, Benchmarking and Implementing Indicators. December 20th, 2017. I'm Dr. Marty Matlock. The Dairy Sustainability Framework approach provides common indicators across the 11 global criteria identified by members and aligns benchmarking for those indicators. Improvement processes within each indicator are the responsibility and authority of national, regional, and/or enterprise organizations, not DSF. The purpose of the indicators is to provide the membership with a common strategy for benchmarking each of the 5 priority global criteria for 2017 and ultimately for all 11 criteria. It is not the intention of DSF to set strategic goals for each indicator or to create or implement a process of improvement for each indicator. Those processes, those roles belong to the national, regional, or enterprise level organizations that support DSF. DSF is creating a common language, a common set of methods and approaches that can be utilized by its membership. The utilization of those techniques, of those processes, is at the discretion fully of the membership. The 11 global criteria are being addressed from 2016 to 2018. Each of the global criteria includes strategic intents, which are aspirational goals and definitions of the global criteria. They define the good that is expected from each global criteria. In 2016, greenhouse gas emissions and animal care were addressed. In 2017, soil nutrients, water, biodiversity, and working conditions have been identified. And then in 2018, waste, market development, rural economies, and product safety and quality will be further defined and addressed. As we evaluate goals from aspirational, like the global criteria, strategic intents, through operational, the decisions we make every day in our operations, whether on the farm, in the processes, in retailers, etc., through the supply chain, we recognize that there's a hierarchy of these goals. Aspirational goals are the highest level directional correct. Strategic goals give deadlines and frameworks, outcomes for those aspirational goals. Tactical goals are ways of implementing the strategic goals, and operational goals are daily decision making. DSF focuses on aspirational goals. Strategic goals are multi-stakeholder led and are being identified through the DSF discussions, but should be further identified through and selected through the membership and multi-stakeholder organizations within memberships. The tactical and operational goals belong to the enterprise. So the national, regional, enterprise sustainability initiatives define strategic goals with multi-stakeholders, tactical and operational goals within each enterprise. DSF does not, as an organization, define strategic, tactical, or operational goals for global dairy. The approach for selecting indicators for each criteria were simply a process of prioritization. We identified the most important indicators to the producers and their customers. We used a materiality metrics to identify then the most important set of goals across the spectrum. We selected indicators that have established measurement methods within those. Those would be indicators that we had experience with, and we created a process that works for everyone. We want to benchmark each indicator globally. We want to keep this simple because the process is hard. It's hard because of the global scale of dairy production that we are embracing. Indicator development required identifying the measurement elements within each indicator. Each sector will identify what is already being measured, what can be measured, and what should be measured. This is the first phase of this process. Common measurements across sectors will be classified as system indicators, and metrics that are unique to sectors will be classified as sector indicators. We would like to prioritize one indicator for each DSF criteria for benchmarking. In our initial phase of this operation, we have actually moved to identifying and proposing one indicator. The indicator selection approach involved a survey, rubric scoring, score analysis, efficacy analysis. Does it work? and then identification of candidate indicators with comments, online comment period from the membership and other invited stakeholders. That led to global criteria indicators for our soil nutrients, soil quality and retention, biodiversity, water availability and quality, and working conditions indicators. Our global indicators for soil nutrients are implementation of a nutrient management plan to enhance production and reduce pollution. For soil quality and retention, soil quality is maintained or improved by good management practices as defined in a soil quality plan. Water availability and quality is defined, the indicators are defined as effluent management plan adopted to minimize impacts to water quality, and water use efficiency for production and processing is measured. The biodiversity indicator is that a biodiversity plan is implemented to preserve, restore, and improve biodiversity on farm and across the supply chain. And finally, working condition indicators or a farm facility safety plan is implemented to ensure worker safety. This information is posted at the www.dsfglobalcriteria.org website, and we are inviting membership comments during Phase 1 review for each of the proposed indicators and the preliminary assessment criteria, the sustainability assessment guides for those. We're going to review each of those guides briefly, not in detail in this webinar, and invite you to read those online and then post your comments online or by email or by PDF document or whatever means is most appropriate for your organization. Share those with the DSF leadership, and then we will aggregate those comments and provide responses and have discourse on modification, adjustment, adoption of those SAGs as appropriate. So the next phase of continuous improvement process is indicator implementation, which involves development of supporting guidance and regional and local membership to benchmark, assess, and improve each indicator. Regional and local membership will do this, not DSF. The details that commenters requested will be developed and communicated through a sustainability assessment guide created for each indicator. We are now presenting to you the first draft of elements of those SAGs by the organization. The continuous improvement process adopted by DSF focuses on benchmarking with implementation addressed in the indicator through national, regional, and or enterprise level organizations. DSF will support benchmarking and documenting. Implementation belongs to the organizations. These may vary across region based on existing infrastructure, support, traditions, relationships with producers, etc. It's a voluntary program. The approach developed through DSF membership is voluntary. This is not a certification program. However, the credibility of this voluntary program rests on the understanding of what implementation of improvement practices means. So, when an organization says must, shall, and should, these are definitional for sustainability application guidelines to define practices. So if a practice must include a certain element, that's by definition. If you're going to say you implement this practice, it must include that element. This is not a prescription that you must do the practice. This is just defining what the practice is so that as we assess global performance, we can understand what those practices are that are being defined by the users. Otherwise, we do not have the basis for comparison. We use these words judiciously. We're very careful about them, but these are just for definition: must, shall, and should. They're not prescriptive for practices. They define what the practices are. For soil nutrients, the strategic intent is that nutrient application is managed to minimize impacts on water and air while maintaining and enhancing soil quality. The recommended indicator is implementation of a nutrient management plan to enhance production and reduce pollution. The theory of change is fairly straightforward. If we want to protect water, air, and soil quality, then a nutrient management plan will achieve these goals by reducing nutrient runoff and air pollution while improving soil quality through proper nutrient application. Written procedures and record keeping will help ensure that agricultural producers are making the best daily and seasonal decisions to drive these outcomes. Implementation of a nutrient management plan to enhance production and reduce pollution means that every farm has recognizes that every farm has unique geographic and nutrient challenges. So each nutrient management plan should be tailored to the specific needs of the enterprise. Nutrient management strategies within nutrient management plans must consider soil type and soil nutrients. Must. If you do not consider soil type and soil nutrients, you don't have a nutrient management plan. Must consider climate, local waterways, cropping systems, feed systems, and numbers of animals, and the amounts of nutrients contained within the manure. Suggested elements for a nutrient management plan are listed here. There are a number of nutrient management plan frameworks available from FAO, from the European Union, from a number of professional organizations, nonprofit organizations, USDA, NRCS, and others around the world. This is not a prescription that these 10 elements must be in a nutrient management plan. This is simply a suggested recommendation for what a nutrient management plan should have, should consider. The contents of a nutrient management plan are solely up to the national, regional, local enterprise organizations to define. Making those contents transparent will help in discourse for improving those processes over time. And we will learn from each other as we implement. We will learn based upon regions and constraints and traditions and practices what works and what doesn't work. Ultimately, we will see a library of nutrient management plan frameworks emerge that are appropriate for size of dairies, locations of dairies, challenges that each of the dairies have, and different practice frameworks. And we provide on the website, a number of examples as well for where you can find nutrient management plan development tools. We've already received some comments in this process. Need for clarification: does adequate manure storage apply to pasture-based farms, etc.? Should they include farm site maps of soil types? How can we determine if a farm has implemented a plan? Who will determine the compliance and by what means, etc.? These are exactly the sort of questions that are going to be critical to receive from membership. And then we will respond to these questions and provide feedback not in an authoritative way, but as a way to enhance discussion, because we want to hear from the membership on each of these questions, what the membership thinks. For example, should the nutrient management plan include a farm's site map of soil types? The answer is yes, because soil types are critical for nutrient management, effective nutrient management. What does that mean for a farmer? Well, that means identifying, using FAO and other tools, identify that are available for free the soil types that the farmer has, and then printing out or selecting and documenting those tools. Now, some places have access to technology that other places do not. And so we should be very sensitive to that. And it's possible that a regional organization may need to help producers with this step. And that's the sort of, so by asking these questions, we can start addressing solutions to these challenges. So another way to frame that is regional organizations should support farm site map development if the farmers do not have access to that information directly for soil types. Think about what that will do globally as every dairy farmer who's applying manure as fertilizer has a better understanding of their soil, the challenges of the soil, and the opportunities for production and increasing fertility of their soil. That's the process of continuous improvement. And this is precisely how our comments and questions will be utilized. We're not going to address and respond to every question at this point that doesn't go to the actual indicator. These are clarifications for implementation, which are incredibly powerful. So as we receive these comments over the comment period, we will be able to then aggregate them and provide recommended responses for review and adoption by the membership. Soil quality and retention. The strategic intent of soil quality and retention is proactively that the system is proactively managed and to enhance and ensure optimum productivity. We do this through the Soll Quality Plan. Again, the theory of change is that optimizing productivity through a soil quality plan, which would certainly include partially a nutrient management plan, would also include activities to maintain soil structure, reduce erosion, increase tilth, improve water holding capacity, drive improved productivity. These are not necessarily nutrient-based activities, but they are related because they enhance nutrient uptake and reduce nutrient loss. The decisions that ag producers make on a daily and seasonally basis drive this outcome. Making better decisions results in better outcomes, and a plan is a way to start moving towards making better decisions. Again, soil is complex, difficult to measure, and varies by geography and region and climate. The appropriate management plans will vary by soil type, climate, cropping systems. The suggested minimum elements of a soil quality plan are listed here. Clearly stated objectives, priority lists and map for soil characteristics to manage and improve across the farm, practice to promote soil organic carbon, reduce erosion, etc. These are incredibly powerful tools for producers to understand, and most producers have this knowledge already. Sometimes it's not written down, and sometimes a regional coordinator or an enterprise can help the producer by helping them document their understanding of the systems, and then help them formally adopt strategies to improve the systems. We provide preliminary resources, and as you identify resources, please share them with us through the review period so we can build a portfolio of resources for each of these elements. These are global resources. Some have some regional focus, like Dairy Australia Smart Fertilizer Management Plan, the Dairy Self-Assessment Tool, and others for Australia. We've already received some comments. How would an organic farm that makes use of significant tillage fare under these requirements when generally minimum tillage is encouraged? The answer is it depends, and that's why the plan is important, and it's entirely possible that the organic farm will need a separate set of practices and considerations, and there are challenges with organic farming that include difficulty in adopting minimum tillage because of weed and pest control. But that's why this is a valuable process. It makes those challenges clear to the farmer and to the community. How do we determine if a farm has implemented a soil quality plan, and who will determine compliance and by what means? The answer to that question is very clear. That's not the role of DSF. This is not a certification program. The organization and its assessments, the various national, regional, local, and enterprise organizations can develop their strategy for compliance. This is not assessment for certification. This is assessment for continuous improvement. The key here is not to create a motive for the farmer, for the producer to deceive, but to create a motive for the producer to engage. How do we reconcile regional requirements? And would DSF require verification of soil quality plans? Number 4 is absolutely not. Number 3 is that's regional requirements means working with other governing bodies in a region to make sure that these align, that you do not create yet another conflicting challenge for producers. It's hard enough to produce without having conflicting demands from organizations like DSF and regional governing organizations. Obviously, governance authorities take precedence in this decision making. Water availability and quality. The strategic intent is that water availability as well as water quality is managed responsibly through the dairy value chain. Recommended indicators include effluent management plan adopted to minimize impacts to water quality. Water use efficiency for production and processing is measured. Again, the theory of change is that strategic intent of managed water quality is met by well-developed effluent management plan. Effluent management plans help maintain the quality of surface and groundwater by minimizing the discharge of effluents containing organic matter, nutrients, salts, or chemicals, and by minimizing erosion from effluent discharges. Measuring water use efficiency allows the operator or the farm, the dairy, the facility, other organizational levels to benchmark water use and track them, so you know what you're doing with water and you know where the risks are and you can manage the availability responsibly. The indicator is that every farm facility has unique geographic and nutrient challenges, so each effluent management plan should be tailored to the specific needs of the enterprise. The effluent management strategies within the effluent management plan must consider climate and rainfall, local waterways, cropping systems, feed plans, a number of animals, and amount of nutrients contained within the effluent. These are the suggested elements of an effluent management plan at its simplest level. These are very familiar to most dairy producers. They may be novel or new to some. It's important that as these are implemented, that they're scaled for the technological and traditional activities of the local producers, but that we also understand that some practices need to change in order for us to become more sustainable. And so it's important to promote adoption of minimum elements so that we can at least achieve a common understanding of our challenge with effluent management. For water use efficiency, water use per month, identification of water use, using online free sources like the water risk factors from WRI Aqueduct or WWF Water Risk Filter Tool, which are very effective as nested water risk management and water action tools. Water usage per mass of product. Measurements should be recorded and tracked to benchmark water use and track improvements. These are very important, simple things that a producer can do, a processor can do to ensure water use efficiency is at least tracked and then improved over time. And a number of resources are available for these practices. Comments and questions so far include does element number 4 apply to pasture-based systems and smallholder farms as well as larger confined animal operations? The answer is yes, because pasture-based systems also have challenges. Element number 4 is capacity to adequately store effluent from operations plus runoff from large rainfall events with storage depth markers. And the reason is because it depends on the pasture, of course, but even pasture systems, the runoff can be quite heavily laden with organic waste, depending on the density of grazing on the pasture. And so it's a consideration that every dairy operation should make. Again, there's no prescription here on what that becomes. That's up to the local, regional, national, enterprise level organization to define, but being aware of it is the key. Could a nutrient management plan be a sufficient effluent management plan? They certainly can be connected because effluent is used from dairies as nutrients, and they should be connected. And that's in many ways why we have a nutrient management plan, is to make sure we do not over-apply effluent nitrogen, phosphorus, and other nutrients onto the land. How will efficiency be determined? That's efficiency in this case is determined by the producer, not by DSF. Because the fact is, the amount of water you require for a unit process is a function of things that are outside the processor's or the producer's control, like temperature. A hot cow drinks more water to stay healthy, and that's appropriate. And we should never, ever compromise the safety and well-being of the animals or the quality of the product or safety of the product in the name of efficiency of water, ever. This is just simply a way to be aware of how much water we're using and to see if maybe we can reduce that. Would farmers require water meter readings to prove efficiency? In some cases, yes. In some cases, no. In-barn usage and irrigation, certainly. Water use is water use. Farms that purchase feed should not be required to quantify the water required to produce the feed. That would be out of scope here. This is what the farmer can actually control with their own faucets, with their own decision making. Certainly, sourcing feed that's irrigated or non-irrigated are decisions farmers can make, and some producers and some regions may want to move that way, and the availability of that knowledge on a local basis of the water content required to produce crops is increasing. But that is not a prescriptive part of this. There's no prescription here. That's certainly a recommended element, or an element that could be adopted if you chose at the producer level. Biodiversity. The strategic intent is direct and indirect biodiversity risks and opportunities are understood, and strategies to maintain or enhance are established. The recommended indicators of biodiversity plan is implemented to preserve, restore, and improve biodiversity on farm and across the supply chain. The way this will change things and improve biodiversity is that implementation of a well-developed biodiversity plan will help producers achieve the goal, the strategic intent, because the minimum elements include identifying local biodiversity priorities, issues, and opportunities, establishing a baseline of existing biodiversity assets, and selecting best management practices that can protect and enhance critical biodiversity resources. When farmers are aware of things, they make better decisions, and this is a process of making farmers, landholders, producers, processors more aware. Creating a benchmark of existing practices and priorities will help determine whether benchmarking or whether management changes have resulted in desired outcomes. Biodiversity is complex, difficult to measure, and varies by geographic region. There is no single biodiversity plan that will fit all the requirements. However, biodiversity plans must include certain minimum elements to be considered effective. Response measures describe actions or practices that can mitigate pressures and improve biodiversity. There should be a clear link between best practice adoption and expected biodiversity outcomes. If a practice is going to be deemed a way to achieve improved biodiversity, there must be a clear link defined. Examples of response practices include establishment of shelter belts, fencing livestock away from riparian zones and waterways, managing invasive species, maintaining indigenous species, erosion control, etc. It is not up to the farmer to do the science to prove these work. We have decades of science to demonstrate these work. It is important, though, that the farmer understand why they are implementing these practices so they can achieve the outcomes that they desire. Biodiversity plans are contextual and should include existing government regs, stakeholder indicators that may already be in place to protect biodiversity and encourage conservation in a region. Government regulations may include bans on deforestation or native grasslands, protection of wetlands, etc., or threatened and endangered species. These all have to be taken into account. We have 9 minimum elements recommended for a biodiversity plan. These come from the International Dairy Federation's biodiversity strategy. They're straightforward. It may be that a particular region uses 2 or 3 of these to get started. The key here is to get started and document what you're doing, learn, and we get better as we can. So the IDF North report, a guide to biodiversity in the dairy sector, is really a key element here. The dairy industry has already invested a significant amount of thought, time, effort into defining these issues. There are others available as well, other resources. Of course, our comments are expected and very good. Farm location and nature of farms and processing sites limit opportunities for protection of natural or terrestrial biodiversity in our region. But water biodiversity is protected by government regulations. So for this reason, a biodiversity plan may not be a good indicator for their farm or processors. I would suggest that in this case, the biodiversity plan is not just terrestrial. This is biodiversity for the planet, not just for the land. And so an aquatic biodiversity plan is effective here. This is where the context matters. Work with the producers to define it locally. Implementation of the plan And who will determine compliance by what means? That is certainly up to each of the local, regional, national enterprise organizations. How do we reconcile regional requirements? That's the value of this exercise, is understanding competing demands for the land. Different governing bodies may have different requirements regarding biodiversity, absolutely correct. And our producers are caught in the middle, so it's important for us to work with our producers to help define what is good here. And that's why the plan is so important. It is a way for the farmer to document their navigation of these competing demands. The answer to number 4, as always, is no. DSF does not require verification of biodiversity plans because DSF is not a certification body. Working conditions. Strategic intent is that across the dairy value chain, workers operate in a safe environment and their rights are respected and promoted. The indicator is a farm facility safety plan is implemented to ensure worker safety. How will this change things? Well, a well-developed farm facility safety plan identifies on-site hazards and establishes plans to keep workers safe through training and risk minimization. Written procedures and mandated record keeping help respect and promote worker rights. These minimum elements for a farm facility safety plan are critical. There's not a single one of these elements that shouldn't be part of every farmer's operation. There is no must here. These are suggested. But reviewing these, it's important for the national, regional, local enterprise organizations to emphasize to producers, processors, to their supply chain, how important these elements are and how achievable they are, and to document impacts and practices so that we can evaluate how things are getting better if they are, or not if they're not. The farm facility safety plan is implemented to ensure worker safety. It should establish standard operating procedures for dealing with hazardous materials. For chemicals, plans should establish how chemicals are labeled, used, and stored, and how and where material safety data sheets are maintained so that workers understand what the risks are they're exposed to. The plan should identify restrictions and required training for chemical handling and should outline best management practices to minimize worker and livestock exposure to chemicals, as well as a plan for treating workers who have been exposed to chemicals. For microbiological hazards, the plan should establish methods to reduce the presence of pathogens and limit worker and animal exposure to pathogens, including cleaning, sterilization procedures, and soil and water testing. The plan should include standard operating procedures for operating machinery and heavy equipment and for interacting with livestock. The farm facility safety plan should include an emergency action plan to help emergency responders make quick decisions. The emergency action plan should include an aerial map of the farm or plan of the facility with hazardous storage areas and utility shutoff locations indicated, and they should be posted in a public place at the entry to the farm and shared with the local emergency responders. Should list names and contact information for owners and managers of the farm facility. A number of resources are available. Farmers should take advantage of them. The organizers should, the national, regional, local enterprise level members should work together, share knowledge. This really should be step one in sustainability. So the comments and questions we've received so far is, how do we determine if a farm or facility has implemented the safety plan? Who will determine compliance and by what means? Again, that's up to the membership and not DSF as an organization. Just as simple advice, just simply ask to see it. The first step in implementation is drafting. And then if this is a situation where I think it would be incumbent upon membership to spend some time visiting their facilities, and where the facilities are struggling, help them come into compliance. It makes their workers safer, it reduces liability, it makes their milk quality better, it reduces losses of time, losses of animals, This is really where sustainability starts. DSF will not require verification of safety plans or any other element. Now, there were some other comments generally. Some reviewers introduced questions or comments that apply broadly to all indicators. Some of the indicators could potentially be covered at a scale beyond the individual farm. Absolutely. Is leveraging such activities an acceptable approach? Absolutely. This approach, while not ICEAL compliant explicitly, is ICEAL aligned and could be ICEAL compliant if implemented with appropriate statistical representation and sampling, for example. And so collective sampling like this, collective analysis, collective decision making by region makes perfect sense, and it's efficient. It can be effective. In fact, more effective than farm level because of the reduced transaction costs of developing the plans. Just make sure that the producers, processors, other supply chain members are involved in this process so it doesn't become a dictatorial set of practices that are handed down from a remote place. Some farms have more holistic farm environmental plans that cover entire requirements of multiple indicators. Would broad plans be acceptable for multiple individual plans? Absolutely. This is just making sure that each of the elements that we say are important and that we as a group say must be implemented are implemented or must be part of an implementation to be defined as a plan are a part of it. So that just means identifying within the broad integrated systems, which are the best plans anyway, where each of these pieces are so that they're easily indexed and referenced. Finally, how will we report for aggregation purposes? Some indicators apply to our manufacturing facilities, to farms we own and operate, and to our water supply farms and water supply chains. Very good question. The approach DSF is going to take for benchmarking is to aggregate by region, perhaps globally, certainly, based upon the number of reporters. So information that's reported will be made anonymous and aggregated where possible. The key, though, is to make sure that we define the things we're doing adequately, similarly, that we can aggregate. So we can put them all in the same box and call them something and have that something mean something, have the same meaning to everybody. And so that's what we're trying to do here. It would be inappropriate to report through DSF any individual member's information without that member's explicit approval. In fact, it's just inappropriate. This is an aggregated reporting process. Members can report their own information if they choose, but DSF is not going to be doing that. So now here's where we are. We're going to be developing the strategy for benchmarking and evaluating the change for these 5 priority goals for 2017 through the next comment period. Please review the schedule, get your comments back to us so that we can implement them and we can develop a set of responses. We'll have a cumulative set of responses. You've already seen some comments. There's no point to ask the same question if you've already seen it. These comments will be posted online in a members only section so that members can review their comments and can add to them and even comment on comments if they choose. This is a discussion time. Then we want to help communicate across the member organizations approaches for developing strategic goals for each indicators. You're going to develop them at the membership level. We can help you with developing with the strategies for that. And then creating a process of improvement for each indicator. We're also going to begin developing the common indicators for the remaining 4 global criteria in 2018. It's going to be a busy year. We've done a lot in 2017, did a lot in 2016. 2018 is going to be even busier because these are starting to overlap in terms of compounding activities as this process evolves to fruition. Thank you for your time. This has been a fairly long webinar discussion. It's here for your review. It's archived for you to refer to and to share with your colleagues as appropriate. I'm Dr. Marty Matlock. Let's get to work.